My name is Marcelo Neri. I'm the Minister of Strategic Affairs in Brazil, also the President of Institute of Applied Research, IPEA. I'm a professor at Fundação Getúlio Vargas, where we did some research on the so-called Brazilian new middle class. I agree completely. Everyone thinks it's middle class, so I think this is very interesting. It's different from the poor. You know, when we talk about the poor, we talk about someone else. When we talk about middle class, everyone thinks him or herself as middle class. So it's interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Marcelo from Brazil. You know, facing similar opportunities and similar challenges, how do you look at keeping, you know, this middle class miracle in both the growth and meeting the needs of the middle class? How do you keep that going when, you know, demonstrably we're still in the middle of difficult economic times globally? I mean, how do you see it?
I think the battle for keeping middle class where it is and to grow will be played especially in the labor markets. The good news is that labor markets are still going well. At least in Brazil, we are in full employment, and that's quite a paradox since we had very low GDP growth. But I think it's more in the labor market. It has been more in terms of formal employment, which I think was genuine and important, the key aspiration of workers, not so much in terms of entrepreneurship, less than I would like it to be. I think what Latin Americans want, and Brazilians in particular, is to have a stable job. And this is what they are getting. I would like them to want also to open a small business, to grow, but I don't see it happening. Just one small point with respect to this bottom-up or top-down in terms of definition. I think when we talk about middle class, we talk very much about a US or European definition, where you have, you know, like 2 cars, 2 dogs, 2 kids. And I don't think this is a good definition, in my opinion.
I'm glad you stopped with that and didn't go to 2 spouses and 2 other things. I mean, so
that's it.
This is good.
I mean, I think we are having already 2 kids, which are very important, you know, gives you sustainability. But I think if we look to the US and to Europe, we're going to see ourselves as poor. I mean, they are the richest one in the world. So I'm very much in line with Minister idea. We have to look, you know, within our communities, our countries, and I think if we do that, we find the world here, because actually Latin America, in terms of its income and its inequality, very high inequality, but this is a very good picture of the world. So I don't think we should import definitions from developed countries, otherwise we're not going to see ourselves moving. We are doing, you know, someone whose incomes change from $1,000 to $2,000. If you look from top, you see, wow, nothing changed in this guy's life. I mean, it's a revolution going on. So I think it's and one last point, I think it will be very tough to respond to the aspirations of the Latin American middle class, because we have very high aspirations. Latin Americans are very positive towards their future, so the governments have really, it's more than, if you control by income, no one is more optimistic with respect to the future than Latin Americans, so this is tough. I would like to also emphasize the role of inequality reduction. I'm not talking about redistribution policies necessarily, like Augusto mentioned. There is no evidence that the impact of programs like Juntos, Bolsa Familia was not important for the middle class, but for poverty reduction. But we live in the most unequal region in the world. Inequality has been going down for good reasons. The labor market, at least in Brazil, you see the bottom part of the labor market, people working and getting much higher wages and growing employment, etc. So I think I agree completely that in the long run, growth, productivity, anywhere, including here, is the key. But between here and the long run, we have to address inequality, I think, and we have been able to address inequality. And I think business that don't look in the bottom part, I saw this in Brazil. We started to release about 8 years ago reports on the middle class. Business didn't realize only 4 or 5 years ago that there's a new consumer. It's not like the US middle class. It's different. Someone who came from the bottom has very high aspirations, but it's not like he doesn't want the same things that I want. So I think it's, but I agree completely. So I would add growth, stability, but also good inequality reduction. Good, I'm saying, in the sense that you have the good and the bad cholesterol. I'm talking about the good one, which is keeping incentives going, but lowering, inequality in a sustainable way.
Go ahead.
I think gender is key, and what I think in Latin America, what we have been doing as government policies to empower not so much women, but the mothers. I think that what we found through these programs that give power to the mothers, it's really a revolution going on in the bottom part, not so much in the middle class. But I don't see. I think the future is of the women. They are more educated than men. I mean, in the labor market, they get lower wages than they should. But that's a matter of time. I don't see. In my country, my boss is a woman. She does, she does very good job. I mean, I think the future is the women. I wouldn't be. I'm more worried about other groups. I think we live in a matriarchat.
My name is Roberto Teixeira da Costa from Brazil. I was the first president of the Securities Exchange Commission. I was a member of ISB as a trustee many years ago. My question is the following. Since our region, one of the main problems is scarcity of savings and consequently of investments, how this middle class should be educated in not only to consume but also to invest?
Yes.
Okay. No, first thing, I think we tend to think the middle class more in terms of consumers. And I think what is behind it, as I said, women are having less kids. These kids are going to school. After school, they're getting a formal job. So there is a sustainable part that we tend to overlook and look them, especially companies, because you're looking at your own business as only as consumers. I think there is what we call, is the title of our book, the bright side of the poor. They're really going after, they want to go up. But I think in terms of savings, I think I'm very negative about savings in Latin America and Brazil in particular. We are low savers. We save 1/4 of what China saves in terms of family. But I don't see any change because, demographics, people getting older, the old save less. You are having falling inequality, the poor save less. You're having lower interest rates, which is incentive. You're having lower uncertainty, like the minister said. So I think all the trends are towards low savings. And finally, people are still very optimistic with respect to their future, so they don't want to save. But people do have, they invest in education, they invest in technical course. So if we enlarge, we are talking about financial savings, but if we enlarge the concept and including productive assets, then perhaps you have a less pessimistic picture. But in my opinion, that's a key challenge to increase household savings. We should have a campaign for that. I would say that in the last years in Latin America, we gave the poor to the markets. This was rather important in terms of keeping the wheels of the economy going. Growth, stability, and redistribution. Now what we need is give the markets to the poor, better markets, better regulation, so when they have access to public service in the private markets, health insurance, complementary savings pension funds, private schools, and these are better, because what I see in Brazil is that consumer protection is a key issue now. Firms are getting bigger, and we need to protect this consumer with better regulation.
Marcelo, Brazil is a worldwide recognized leader across the region when we're talking about social innovators and social innovation. How do you see this relationship between government and social entrepreneur? What have you learned about that relationship so far?
I think it's always a relationship of mutual dependency. In the sense that perhaps you don't have the markets, the market cannot find by itself, the necessary return. And when you're looking for social return, you have to have some sort of mechanism, social targets. What I, from before I went to the government, from Getúlio Vargas Foundation, we designed programs for the states and for the municipality at very low cost, reaching millions of people using the infrastructure set by the state, like Bolsa Família. Yeah. So by like 3 months, you could reach 1 million people at a very, very low cost. Why? The infrastructure was already there. The challenge is how to allow the private sector to use this infrastructure, because the state, the municipalities in Brazil, was real, they could use that. So I think there is really a great opportunity to give, big jumps to reach the poorest of the poor, because in all over Latin America, you have conditional cash transfers. You know where the poor are, you know who they are, you have their address, you have a card, you have everything you need to use a good idea. You have to have, of course, a good idea, a good business model, but I think the infrastructure is there in a way that 3, 4, 5 years ago it was not.
There, yes, Marcelo.
Of doing business, doing social business, how hard it is to open a social business, to close one, so to improve the regulation. We really need to know how to do it, and that's a practical question. I think, the way you find as you go along the way. But I wouldn't discard, of course, I'm in the Brazilian government, so I have to see from my side. But I think it's very hard in the private sector to have a scale. For example, Bolsa Família in Brazil, you spend 0.5% of GDP, you reach 45 million people. That's tough. That's tough too. You have to, but how the private sector, once you sunk that cost, how can it, that's I think it's the challenge, because you cannot compete with that. No one can compete, has this delivery possibility. So, and I believe very much in terms of competition, political competition across different sectors, states, one state, do innovation, and has incentive to talk with the private sector to learn how to do it, because want to be the president, or so there is competition in a way, so I think it's I wouldn't discard. What I would like to have is a race, everyone running towards the same objective, which is to eradicate poverty. I think it's a very, very, I think that's the tough one for the private sector. And also how you attack, a holistic approach. That's very hard also from the private sector, because you want to explore a certain glasses and things like that. So you have to have an integral approach to the problem. And in my view, I had an experience of evaluating many microcredit experience here in Peru, Mexico, Nicaragua. I was doing evaluation in Brazil, in my country, a big program. And for my surprise, the most interesting one was this one that was there in front of me. I knew for 10 years. So I think that perhaps Jordan should provide glasses for us as well, you know. I think we say we are in the, we are in the knowledge era, era do conhecimento, e eu creio que precisamos entrar na era do
I believe that we need to enter in the era of recognition to recognize the success of people.
The public sector, and how is it the interface between them? You have the scale, you have the innovation. How you combine that? You have like a snake with wings. You have to have a different type of animal. You're not going to find solution in one or the other. I think the best solution, especially in Latin America, you have big governments. We pay taxes for that.
Yes.
So you're already paying for that, so you might as well take advantage. But how you combine the private sector, ingenuity, creativity, how to combine that? I think this is the challenge.
I have been very interested by the concern of the minister regarding scale, because I'm Brazilian and Brazil is such a huge country. But I was wondering, when we are thinking of scaling or giving scale to one enterprise or one solution, like was the case with the eyeglasses, or greater access to insurance policies, maybe we should have many different social solutions at a micro level, along the line of what Alvaro said, to a certain extent. For example, creating a group or a system. But what is your specific question? My question is it possible to think of scaling not one solution, but social enterprises in a country? Because it may be the case of a child like the one that was described, or another enterprise.
Is to have, we are looking for social returns, and in the long run, that's what we all want. So you would have some sort of, system of social. Everyone, I think, agrees that's on social targets. Like if a kid, learns in school, that's a social benefit that will last for his whole life, etc. So I think we have to think in terms of systemic approach, where you start to measure. Now, for example, in Rio, every 2 months every kid do an exam, math, science, Portuguese. So you can measure improvement. But I think, taking his point, I believe very much in reward social returns. The problem is that if you have a tragedy, if the school gets flooded, as so often happens, you have to have insurance. It's not easy, but I think we have to have a system that looks for social return, and I think that's a role of the government. I mean, not a role. I think it has to be a joint, to take your point, a joint construction. But in the end of the day, you have to have everyone there, and the government is the one who can give scale to this thing. And I think, like places like this, the World Economic Forum, is the place where you can diffuse this technology worldwide or to many countries.
Obrigada.
Two things. First, I think communication is essential, so we have not only a Jordan effect, to propagate that, the example. I think this is, in our evaluations I did, there is this idiosyncratic thing, which is that guy that starts everything, and that's very hard to replicate. So you may try to communicate that, and so this is how you inspire people. I think this is a key thing, and that's the human side. That's very hard. And the second is the name of the Peruvian program, Juntos. I think that's a task for everyone. And just to comment her question, what I find really hard in the electoral market is when we are talking about children. Children do not vote. So it's really hard to get, politicians to work for children, for the future. That I find hard to do. So I think social targets, I think this is one way to try to have longer horizon, to not to be on the next election, but to have really
long term,
the long run in perspective.
Obrigada.